Jack glanced up at his rearview mirror, eyeing the woman in the back seat. Could it be her? He thought. After losing his job, he'd resorted to driving a taxi, and this woman bore a striking resemblance to Catherine, his ex. But something was off. This woman practically screamed money, and Catherine never had that kind of vibe. When they pulled up to a sprawling mansion, Jack was convinced this wasn't just rich, it was filthy rich. He wanted to know more, but duty called. Another fare was waiting. His mind raced as he worked the rest of his shift. He needed to tell someone, but Ashley, his wife, wasn't the right person. "How was your day?" Ashley asked as he walked in the door. "Not bad," he replied on autopilot, his mind still on Catherine or whoever that woman was. How had she become so wealthy? The questions wouldn't stop. Sleep came easy that night, but Jack was up early. He decided to try his usual route, hoping for an airport fare from the downtown hotel. It paid well, around $60. "I need to go to," the customer said, giving an address a few blocks away. Jack's heart sank. This would barely cover gas. "Would you mind waiting a bit? My friend's joining me, and we're headed to a cafe," the customer asked. Jack didn't really care at this point, so he just nodded. And then she appeared, his Catherine. There was no doubt in his mind. Even with the fancy clothes, it was her. He wanted to say something, but pride held him back. He didn't want her to see him like this. Silent and tense, he drove them to their breakfast spot. But as he pulled away, Jack changed his mind. He found a free spot nearby and took another taxi back. Despite driving a cab, Jack always dressed sharp, and today was no exception. He walked into the cafe, his eyes searching for Catherine. There she was, chatting animatedly with her friend, the picture of contentment. As Jack walked past, their eyes met. "Jack, is that you?" Catherine's voice held a pleasant surprise. "Catherine. Wow, it's been ages," Jack replied, feigning surprise, even though he'd been looking for her. "How are you?" "I've been great, actually," she beamed. "What about you?" Catherine gestured for Jack to join them. He accepted, pulling up a chair. They fell into easy conversation, catching up on old times and new lives. Time seemed to melt away as they laughed and reminisced. As Jack rose to leave, he hesitated. He wanted to ask for her number, but the words wouldn't come. Catherine sensed his hesitation and took the initiative. "Hey, why don't you give me your number? It would be great to keep in touch," she suggested, her smile warm and inviting. Jack gladly recited his number, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. As he walked back to his cab, his thoughts were consumed by Catherine. She had mentioned marrying a wealthy man, the source of her newfound luxury. A pang of jealousy mixed with longing struck Jack. He still had feelings for her, a dormant ember rekindled. The idea of reuniting danced in his mind, even though they were both married. It was a complication, but one he couldn't ignore. Jack finished his shift and headed home, greeted by the smell of dinner and Ashley's smiling face. "I made your favourite, spaghetti and meatballs," she announced, clearly happy. Jack nodded absently, his mind still occupied by Catherine. "Is everything okay?" Ashley asked, picking up on his distracted air. "Oh, sorry," Jack mumbled. "Just thinking about work. Everything's fine, and thanks for the food." He forced a smile, hoping to appease her. Truthfully, life had been strained since Jack lost his job. He'd become withdrawn and distant, assuming Ashley would eventually grow tired of him. But to his surprise, she'd rallied, offering unwavering support and encouragement. Despite this, something inside Jack had shifted. He realized he'd stopped truly communicating with his wife long before the job loss. Life had grown dull, and Ashley, though kind and caring, no longer held the same attraction for him. He couldn't pinpoint why. Meanwhile, Ashley chalked up his behavior to the stress of unemployment. She poured her energy into supporting him, unaware of the deeper disconnect that had taken root. But the reappearance of Catherine was about to change everything for both of them. For the next few days, Jack couldn't shake the memory of Catherine. He longed to call her, but he didn't have her number. She, however, had his. He wondered if her invitation to breakfast was simply a way to flaunt her newfound wealth. Then one morning, his phone rang while he was waiting for a fare at the hotel. It was Catherine. "Would you like to meet up today?" she asked, her voice unusually subdued. "Sure," Jack replied. "Where would you like to meet?" "The same cafe where we had breakfast," she answered. They reconvened at the cafe, and Jack immediately noticed something was amiss. Catherine's normally vibrant blue eyes were hidden behind sunglasses, and he could see faint bruising around them. "Is everything okay, Catherine?" he asked, his concern genuine. She hesitated, then adjusted her sunglasses. "Everything's fine," she said, her voice strained. "Being rich has its downsides, that's all." After a pause, she continued. "I just needed to get away, talk to someone. I'm glad I had your number." "You can tell me what's going on, Catherine," Jack offered gently. "It's okay, Jack," she replied, a hint of gratitude in her voice. "Thank you for meeting me. This is enough." She then tried to change the subject, asking, "Why didn't you say hello the first time we met?" Jack looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean? You recognized me in the cab?" She laughed softly. "Of course I did, silly. I was hoping you'd start the conversation, but you never did." "Oh, I wasn't sure at first, but then I couldn't stop thinking about you," Jack confessed, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Catherine's smile widened, her blue eyes sparkling. "Is that why you followed us here?" she teased. Jack felt a warmth spread through him as he gazed into those familiar eyes. They held a depth of emotion he hadn't seen in years, and today they radiated genuine happiness to see him. He wanted nothing more than to stay in this moment forever. "Well, the second time I definitely recognized you," he admitted, fumbling for the right words. "And I wanted to say hi." Catherine's playful demeanor returned. "I'm glad you did," she said, her voice laced with a flirtatious lilt. Jack was bewildered by her kindness. Their last encounter had been far from amicable. Catherine had issued an ultimatum: divorce Ashley or lose her. Jack had been unwilling to do either, leading to a painful separation. He never wanted to break up, but the thought of divorce had been equally unbearable. Now, seeing Catherine so playful and carefree, Jack couldn't help but wonder if it was all an act. The bruises around her eyes gnawed at him, a stark reminder that something wasn't right. He wanted to delve deeper, to uncover the truth behind her facade, but he didn't want to push too hard. Their conversation continued, a delicate dance of laughter, reminiscing, and unspoken questions. The cafe filled with the chatter of other patrons, but for Jack and Catherine, it was as if they were the only two people in the world. Yet beneath the surface, a tension lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement of the complexities that lay between them. As their time together drew to a close, Jack felt a pang of disappointment. He wanted to prolong the moment, to learn more about the woman Catherine had become. But he knew he couldn't keep her from her life, however troubled it might be. They said their goodbyes, a lingering touch of hands, a final smile. Jack watched as Catherine walked away, a mixture of confusion and longing swirling within him. He had once again failed to get her number, and he had no idea if they would ever meet again. The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear: Catherine had reawakened a part of him that he thought was long dormant, and he couldn't ignore the pull she had on his heart. That night, Ashley welcomed Jack home with her usual warm smile and a delicious meal, but his thoughts were consumed by Catherine. Was she okay? Why was she bruised? Had her husband hurt her? The next day, Jack drove to Catherine's mansion, parking nearby in hopes of intercepting her. Hours passed with no sign of her, until finally, the gates swung open and Catherine emerged in her luxury car, alone. Jack followed her to a gas station where she pulled up beside him. "Are you following me again?" she asked with a wry smile. She looked much better today. "Yes, I am," Jack admitted. "I need to talk to you, Catherine." They parked at a nearby cafe, and Jack wasted no time. "What's going on, Catherine? I can't stop thinking about you. Is it your husband?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Catherine sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know if it's right to drag you into my personal life, But yes, it's my husband. He's a millionaire and he thinks he owns me, that he can do whatever he wants. Her voice trembled as she continued. 2 days ago we had an argument and he hit me. Jack was stunned. A wave of anger and protectiveness surged through him. He wanted to rescue Katharina, to shield her from this monster. But how? Catherine, I'm so sorry to hear it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Please tell me, is there anything I can do to help? I don't think there is, she replied quietly. But Jack wouldn't give up. I will help you, Catherine. I wish I never let you go. It was stupid of me. Catherine's expression hardened. Let's not go there, Jack. It was simple. You were supposed to divorce your wife, and I was ready to start a life with you, but you left me. Not me, you left me. I know, Catherine, I'm so sorry, Jack pleaded. You say you'll help me now, she scoffed, but you can't. Would you divorce your wife for me now? I don't think so. Jack met her gaze with newfound determination. What if I did? He challenged. Catherine was taken aback. Really? I'm pretty sure you won't, she said, her voice laced with doubt. But if you did, she added, a spark returning to her eyes. I'll be yours, Jack. That's my word. This time, Jack made absolutely sure to get Catherine's phone number. He memorized it, repeated it back to her, and even typed it into his phone twice. Catherine, however, remained skeptical. Could Jack really follow through on his promise? Back home, Ashley greeted him with her usual warmth and a plate of dinner, but Jack knew he couldn't delay the inevitable. We need to talk, Ashley, he began, his voice heavy. Is everything okay, Jack? Ashley asked, concern etched on her face. He took a deep breath. Not really, I'm not sure how to say this, so I'll just say it directly. I'm divorcing you. The words hung in the air, a shockwave rippling through the room. Ashley's eyes widened in disbelief. Wow, she whispered. That was unexpected. I've made up my mind, Ashley, Jack said, his voice firm. I'm sorry to say it this way, but there's no turning back. He placed the divorce papers on the table. You can sign them whenever you're ready. With that, he retreated to the living room, indicating he would be sleeping there. Ashley was stunned. She wanted to plead with Jack to understand the reasons behind his sudden decision, but the conversation felt futile. She sensed she had already lost the battle. With a heavy heart, she agreed to consider the divorce, knowing deep down that their marriage was over. The next day, Jack called Catherine to meet him at the cafe. Look, he said, handing her a copy of the divorce papers. Ashley is going to sign them. She has no choice. His tone was resolute, his eyes unwavering. Catherine's jaw dropped. Wow, just wow, she stammered. Honestly, I was sure you wouldn't go through with it. So, what's next? She asked, her voice laced with a newfound respect. Let's start with your husband, Jack declared. Tell me what's going on. Catherine hesitated, then poured out her story. At first, everything was perfect, but then his true colours started to show. He's incredibly jealous, flying into rages if another man even looks at me. He started yelling, calling me names. Then, one day, he hit me, hard. That was the beginning of my nightmare. Her voice cracked with emotion. And now, I don't know what to do. Jack's heart ached for her. I do, he said, a determined glint in his eyes. We'll record him, get evidence, and go to the police. Then you file for divorce. Catherine shook her head. You don't understand how powerful he is. He has the best lawyers. Filing for divorce would leave me with nothing. But there's something else, she trailed off, a hint of desperation in her voice. What is it? Tell me, Jack urged. No, you can't do it, you won't, Catherine insisted. I will, trust me, my love, I will, Jack vowed. I'm so sorry you divorced your wife for me, Catherine confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I agreed to this thinking you wouldn't actually do it. You didn't before when I really needed you. I'm so sorry if I ruined your life. She stood up to leave. Wait, what are you saying? Jack demanded, a wave of anger rising within him. Were you just playing me? No, I'm not, Catherine insisted. It's just, I didn't think you would actually divorce your wife. And even if you did, you wouldn't be able to help me anyway. I'm so sorry, Jack. I still love you, and I would never intentionally hurt you." With that, she turned and walked away. Jack tried to stop her, but she was already gone. Jack returned home, defeated and lost. He didn't know what to do next. Should he proceed with the divorce or try to salvage his marriage before it was too late? Ashley wasn't home that day, having left to stay with her sister. Jack, consumed by his thoughts of Catherine, didn't even notice her absence. It was a perfect night for him to be alone, to wrestle with his conflicting emotions and the weight of his decisions. Unbeknownst to him, Ashley had already signed the divorce papers and moved out, leaving only a note behind. The next morning, he found himself consumed by thoughts of Catherine. Had she been playing him? But she had said she loved him. And what was that thing he couldn't or wouldn't do? Determined to win her back, Jack called Catherine. When she didn't answer, he sent a text, telling her he'd be waiting for her at the cafe. An hour passed, and then the door opened. Catherine walked in, more beautiful than he remembered. A surge of love welled up in him, solidifying his resolve to be with her. "So what is the thing I wouldn't do?" he asked as she sat down. Catherine hesitated. "It's difficult to say," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My husband is very ill, in constant pain, and I thought letting him go would be a kindness." She struggled to find the right words. "What, do you mean kill him?" Jack asked bluntly. "I wouldn't put it that way," Catherine replied. "It would be doing him a favor. He's suffering. If you could just mix his medications." Her voice trailed off. Jack was shocked. "Wait a minute," he interrupted. "I don't think I could do that." "See, this is exactly what I told you," Catherine said sadly. "You can't do it, but if you did, his fortune would be mine. He has no children, only me. We would get everything, you and I. It's millions of dollars, Jack, more than you could imagine." The words millions of dollars echoed in Jack's mind. It was a tempting prospect, especially when paired with the possibility of reuniting with Catherine. She was right. The man was dying anyway. It almost seemed like a logical solution. "What exactly would I need to do?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sensing his hesitation wavering, Catherine began to lay out the plan. Catherine leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are construction workers at the mansion. You can blend in with them. I'll help you get in." Jack nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. "That seems easy enough. What time?" "Tonight," Catherine replied. "I'll make sure everything is ready. Just follow the workers and I'll tell you what to do next." That evening, Jack prepared himself mentally for the task ahead. He dressed in dark clothing and made his way to Catherine's mansion. As he approached, he saw the construction workers entering and quickly joined them, blending in seamlessly. Catherine was waiting just inside the door. She gestured that she would call him later and left once she saw he had arrived. "He's upstairs, first door on the left." Catherine's hushed voice crackled through the phone line. "The medications are on his bedside table. Just be quick and quiet." "Don't worry," Jack whispered, glancing around the empty street before slipping into the house. "I'll take care of it." He ended the call and quickly made his way towards the staircase, the adrenaline masking his unease. He crept up the grand staircase, the plush carpet muffling his footsteps. He reached the top and, heart pounding, turned to the left. A sliver of light escaped from a partially open door. He paused, mistaking it for the study. He leaned closer, straining to hear the voices drifting from within. "He's got it bad for me," Catherine chuckled. "He'll do whatever I say. Then he can enjoy his little vacation in jail. My husband gone, Jack in the slammer. Sounds like the perfect time for us, don't you think?" Jack's blood ran cold. Shocked and betrayed, he stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? Catherine had manipulated him, and he was caught in a dangerous trap. He felt a wave of panic rising within him, but forced himself to stay calm. He needed to warn Richard, Catherine's husband. Taking a deep breath, Jack pushed open the study door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and the air was heavy with the scent of old books and expensive cologne. Richard was slumped in an armchair, holding a photo in his trembling hand. Jack's steps faltered as he approached, his eyes drawn to the picture. He felt his heart skip a beat. The person in the photo was someone he recognized. Shock washed over him anew, rendering him momentarily speechless. What did this mean? How was this person connected to Richard and Catherine? Jack's mind was a whirl of questions and confusion. He stood there, torn between the need to speak up and the urge to process the unexpected revelation. Finally, he made a decision. "Richard," he began, his voice unsteady, "I need to tell you something important." But his gaze kept flicking back to the photo, the image etched into his mind, leaving him more unsettled than ever. "Do you know where she is?" Richard asked, his voice weak but hopeful. Jack was taken aback. Richard seemed indifferent to life. Maybe Catherine was right. Perhaps he was really sick. Jack quickly gathered his senses and replied, "Actually, I do." Richard's eyes brightened, a spark of life returning. He looked at Jack, trying to understand who he was. "Who are you?" he asked. "My wife is Ashley, and the woman in that photo is her mother," Jack replied. "Her name is Paulina," Richard said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I met her right after she came to the US. I lost her. She was the only person I truly loved. She loved me back unconditionally." Jack paused, the revelation hitting him hard. He was about to tell Richard about Catherine's plans, but then had a new idea. What if Ashley is his daughter? He thought. This could be a way to secure his fortune legitimately. "Did you ever have a daughter?" he asked Richard. "Not that I know of," Richard replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. At that moment, Catherine entered the room. She saw them chatting, and her face twisted in frustration and fear. She couldn't figure out what was going on. Jack took a deep breath. "Catherine, I need to help Richard." Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Richard turned to Catherine, looking for answers. "Catherine, who is he? How do you know him?" Catherine forced a smile. "He's an old friend from work, Richard. He's just here to visit." Richard nodded slowly, his confusion growing. "I see," Catherine quickly interjected. "Jack, can we talk alone for a moment? Richard needs to get some rest. He's very ill." Jack hesitated, but then nodded. "All right." They stepped out of the room, and Catherine closed the door behind them. Her expression changed instantly, eyes blazing with anger. "What do you think you're doing, Jack?" Jack stood firm. "I'm trying to help Richard. He deserves to know the truth." Catherine's voice dropped to a hiss. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Leave now, and we can forget this ever happened." Jack met her gaze steadily. "Look, Catherine, I know what's going on. You wanted to frame me, but I've recorded you two talking about killing Richard. But look, I'm not going to the police. I have an offer." Catherine's face blanched with shock. She hadn't known he overheard their conversation. She had no choice but to hear him out. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to mask her fear with defiance. "You let me see Richard, and that's it. I won't tell anybody about your plans. You divorce him, and you can get half of his fortune anyway," Jack stated calmly. Catherine's fury boiled over. "Just go now, leave everything here, and you'll be safe." Jack held up a hand. "Okay, how about this? You let me visit Richard, and that's it. A couple of times, and then I'll be gone forever." Catherine sensed something was amiss, but she felt cornered and agreed reluctantly. "Fine, you can see him, but only a few times. Then you're gone for good." Jack nodded, sensing her hesitation, but knowing he had no other options. "Agreed." Catherine thought quickly. She could come up with another plan to get rid of both Jack and Richard later. For now, she needed to keep the peace. Jack stepped back into Richard's room, feeling the tension ease slightly. Richard looked at him with weary eyes. "Is everything all right?" Richard asked. Jack forced a smile. "Yes, Richard, everything is fine. I'll be visiting you more often. We have a lot to talk about." Catherine watched them, her mind racing with thoughts of how to maintain control. She knew she had to act fast to protect her own interests. As Jack sat down beside Richard, He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much more dangerous game, but for now, he had bought himself and Richard some time. "Richard, I want to take you to see someone," Jack said, choosing his words carefully. "We should go early tomorrow morning." Richard nodded, a hint of hope in his eyes. "All right, I'll be ready." The next morning, Jack arrived at Richard's house, but Richard had already made his own arrangements. He was ready to leave with his car, accompanied by a driver and another man who looked formidable. "Who's this?" Jack asked, eyeing the stranger. "He's my bodyguard," Richard replied. Jack frowned. "I'll only go if the bodyguard stays behind. Otherwise, I'm not coming." Richard hesitated but eventually agreed. "Fine, the bodyguard stays." With the bodyguard left behind, Jack took Richard to a graveyard. They walked silently to a specific grave. It was Paulina's. Jack stepped back to give Richard some privacy, watching as Richard broke down in tears. Jack waited, letting Richard have his moment. When Richard finally composed himself, Jack approached him. "Richard, we need to talk alone." Richard wiped his eyes and nodded, following Jack to a secluded bench. Jack took a deep breath. "Richard, I think you need to get rid of your bodyguard." Richard looked puzzled. "Why?" "Because you need to. Trust me, all you need to know at this point is that he's not protecting you, he's doing the opposite." Jack couldn't reveal the entire story yet. He had his own plans to unfold. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he didn't push further. "Well, I could let him go, but I have a plan. He stays for now." Jack was taken aback. Richard seemed more resolute today. Perhaps seeing Paulina's grave had given him some clarity or strength. Richard's eyes widened, the news hitting him harder than anything he had heard before. "My daughter," he whispered, hope mingling with disbelief. "Yes," Jack confirmed. "I think meeting her could change everything." Richard nodded slowly, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "All right, let's go." Jack had already arranged a meeting with Ashley, and she was waiting at a cozy cafe downtown. She sat by the window, nervously stirring her coffee, thinking this meeting was about their relationship. Her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. When Jack entered the cafe, Ashley's eyes lit up, but her excitement turned to confusion as she saw him walk in with an older man. Richard, though aged, had a certain presence about him, a quiet strength that seemed familiar. Jack led Richard to the table and Ashley stood up, her eyes darting between the two men. "Jack, what's going on?" Jack took a deep breath, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Ashley, this is Richard, Richard Fletcher." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Ashley, his heart pounding with a mix of joy and sorrow. She had her mother's eyes, but there was something undeniably his about her as well. He instinctively knew she was his daughter. "Ashley," he said, his voice trembling, I think I'm your father." Ashley felt a warmth spread through her chest, a deep, inexplicable connection. She looked into Richard's eyes, and something inside her broke free. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she couldn't help but cry. "My father," she whispered, her voice cracking. Richard stepped closer, his own tears falling freely. "I believe so, Ashley." Ashley's outstretched hands shook slightly as she reached towards Richard, her heart pounding in her chest. Richard took her hands in his touch both gentle and reassuring. A surge of warmth spread through Ashley, a feeling of connection so profound and unexpected that it momentarily took her breath away. "I never even knew you existed," Richard confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Ashley nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I always wondered. I always felt like something was missing." Richard pulled Ashley into a gentle embrace, and for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of completeness, as if a missing piece of her soul had finally been found. Jack watched the reunion with a cold, calculating eye. He had played his cards right, manipulating the situation to his advantage. Now, with Richard and Ashley reunited, Jack saw a clear path to his ultimate goal. wealth and power. He had no genuine affection for either of them. They were merely pawns in his game. As they held each other, Richard whispered, "We have so much to catch up on, so much to talk about." Ashley nodded, smiling through her tears. "I want to know everything." Jack stepped back, giving them space, knowing this was just the beginning of their journey together. His next conquest was clear: Ashley's heart. Witnessing her newfound happiness, a spark of hope ignited within him. He knew her kind and forgiving nature, and believed she could easily overlook his deceit. After all, hadn't he brought her the greatest gift of all, her father? Catherine paced back and forth in her lavish bedroom, her phone pressed to her ear. "Listen, Damien," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We have a problem. It's Jack. He's sniffing around, asking too many questions. I think he knows something." Damien, Richard's burly bodyguard, listened intently on the other end of the line. "What do you want me to do, my love?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Get rid of him," Catherine spat. "And Richard too. I want them both out of the picture, permanently." Damien chuckled darkly. "Consider it done." Meanwhile, Jack was busy weaving his web of deceit. He showered Ashley with attention, showering her with compliments and small gifts. He even helped her around the house, fixing leaky faucets and mowing the lawn. Ashley, ever the optimist, saw this as a sign that Jack was finally turning over a new leaf. She wanted to believe that he had changed, that he truly regretted his actions. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Jack took Ashley's hand in his. "Ashley," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I've hurt you deeply. I've been a fool. But I want you to know that I love you more than anything in the world. I'll do whatever it takes to win you back." Ashley's heart fluttered. She had longed to hear those words, to feel the warmth of Jack's love once again. "Oh, Jack," she sighed, leaning into his embrace. "I want to believe you. I really do." Jack seized the opportunity, pouring out his heart, confessing his regrets and promising to be a better husband. Ashley listened, her heart softening with each word. In the end, she couldn't resist the pull of her love for Jack. She forgave him, believing that their love could conquer all. With the divorce papers signed but not yet filed, Jack felt a surge of triumph. His plan was falling into place perfectly. He revelled in Ashley's renewed affection, basking in the warmth of her forgiveness. He had successfully manipulated her once again, using her love for her newfound father as a tool to regain her trust. Meanwhile, Damien, the menacing shadow lurking in the background, had begun his surveillance of Jack. He followed Jack's every move, observing his interactions with Ashley and Richard, his mind racing with sinister possibilities. Damien was a man of action, not patience, and he yearned to eliminate Jack swiftly and decisively. Richard would be next, but for now, Jack was the primary target. Catherine, sensing the shifting tides, had undergone a dramatic transformation. She showered Richard with affection, lavishing him with compliments and tender care. Richard was bewildered by this sudden change in her demeanour. He had grown accustomed to her coldness and indifference, and her newfound warmth felt like a strange and unsettling dream. He couldn't help but wonder if there was an ulterior motive behind her sudden change of heart. Damien, fueled by Catherine's desperation and his own twisted desires, devised a plan to eliminate Jack. He decided to stage a hit-and-run accident, making it look like a tragic mishap. One evening, as Jack was walking home from the grocery store, Damien revved his engine and sped towards him, his eyes filled with murderous intent. But just as Damien was about to strike, a sleek black car screeched to a halt, blocking his path. Richard emerged from the vehicle, his face grim and determined. "Get out of the car, Damien," he commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Damien, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before reluctantly stepping out of the car. He was met with the steely gaze of Richard, who held a thick manila envelope in his hand. "I know everything, Damien," Richard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I've known for a long time that you and Catherine were having an affair. I hired a private investigator to gather evidence, and he's uncovered your entire plot to kill me and frame Jack." Damien's face paled. He had underestimated Richard, believing him to be a weak and ailing old man. But Richard had been playing the long game, biding his time until he had all the pieces in place. "You're under arrest, Damien," Richard declared, as two burly police officers emerged from the shadows and handcuffed the stunned bodyguard. Catherine, who had been watching from a distance, gasped in horror as she witnessed Damien's downfall. She had been so consumed by her own greed and ambition that she had failed to see the trap that Richard had set for her. In the aftermath of Damien's arrest, Catherine was also taken into custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she was quickly convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Richard, having saved Jack's life and exposed Catherine's treachery, felt a sense of closure. He had finally rid himself of the toxic influences that had plagued his life for so long. And having orchestrated Damien's downfall and Catherine's imprisonment, Richard turned his attention to Jack. He knew that Jack had been manipulated and used by Catherine, but he also recognized the role Jack had played in the events that had transpired. Richard believed in justice and accountability, and he felt that Jack needed to face the consequences of his actions. Richard approached Jack, his expression stern but not unkind. "Jack," he began, "I know you've been through a lot. You've been deceived and manipulated by Catherine, and I understand that you were blinded by your love for her. But you've also made some grave mistakes, and you need to take responsibility for them." Jack listened, his head bowed in shame. He knew that Richard was right. He had allowed himself to be drawn into Catherine's web of lies, and he had hurt Ashley deeply in the process. "I'm willing to give you a chance to make things right," Richard continued. "Tell Ashley the truth. Confess everything. If you do that, and if you agree to disappear from her life for good, I won't press charges against you. But if you refuse, I'll make sure you face the full force of the law." Jack looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and despair. He knew that Richard was offering him a lifeline, a chance to redeem himself, but he also knew that it would be a long and difficult road to redemption. Jack, overcome with remorse and a glimmer of hope for redemption, confessed everything to Ashley. He poured out his heart, revealing the depths of his deception and the pain he had caused. Ashley listened, her heart aching with a mixture of anger and sorrow. But as Jack spoke, she also saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the desperation for forgiveness. In the end, Ashley's love for Jack, coupled with her newfound understanding of his vulnerability and the manipulation he had endured, led her to forgive him. However, she knew that their relationship could never be the same. The trust had been broken too deeply, the wounds too fresh. Jack, honoring his agreement with Richard, disappeared from Ashley's life. He left town, seeking to rebuild his life and atone for his mistakes. Ashley, meanwhile, found solace and strength in her relationship with her father. Richard, with his vast resources and unwavering support, helped Ashley start a new chapter in her life. She pursued her dreams, traveling the world, volunteering for charitable causes, and ultimately finding fulfillment and happiness. Years later, Ashley, now a successful and independent woman, received a letter from Jack. He had spent years working to better himself, seeking therapy and volunteering his time to help others. He expressed his deep regret for the pain he had caused and his hope that Ashley had found happiness. Ashley read the letter with a mix of emotions. She had moved on with her life, but the memory of Jack still lingered in her heart. She decided to write back, not to rekindle their romance, but to offer forgiveness and closure. In the end, both Ashley and Jack found their own paths to happiness, their lives forever intertwined by the events that had brought them together and torn them apart. Ashley, with the love and support of her father, had blossomed into a confident and compassionate woman, while Jack had learned the hard way the importance of honesty, integrity, and true love. Whoa, what a twist! If you're as hooked as I am, smash that subscribe button, hit the like, and drop a comment below. Let's unravel more stories together.